Welcome to People and Profit, the business show that's always got time to play. Coming up, Ukraine promises to tackle corruption, but will it be enough to satisfy the IMF? We'll speak to the country's finance minister. What's the point of the World Trade Organization? As more countries choose to strike their own deals, we're looking at why the WTO is struggling to stay relevant. And fighting to play on, how France's independent toy shops are facing down fierce competition in order to survive. First up, though, Ukraine has promised to step up efforts against corruption in an attempt to resolve an impasse with its international lenders. A bill establishing an anti-corruption court will be put to Parliament in February, according to the country's Justice Minister. The head of the International Monetary Fund has criticised Kiev after lawmakers tried to undermine the agencies designed to weed out misconduct. In a statement, Christine Lagarde said fighting corruption was crucial to achieving stronger growth and was part of the government's commitment under the programme with the IMF. Justice Minister Pavlo Petrenko now says the bill is being prepared and he's confident it will be passed in the next session of Parliament.
If this law is introduced with the principles of non-political, transparent and independent recruitment of judges, it's highly likely that there will be a majority in the Parliament, because this is the main guarantee for any person, including a member of Parliament, of fair justice.
Well, I'm joined in studio now by Ukraine's Finance Minister, Oleksandr Danyliuk. Thank you very much for coming in to speak to us, first of all. Can I start by asking you about this anti-corruption court? Is the IMF going to be satisfied by this step, do you think?
Well, the establishment of anti-corruption court is clearly number one prior action for the IMF program, but it's number one priority for our country as well, because without a proper functioning anti-corruption court, there will be never well-functioning anti-corruption infrastructure. And at the moment we have all the elements of it already in place, including the Agency on Prevention Corruption, the Anti-Corruption Bureau that works on investigation corruption offences. What is missing in this link, the last element, is the Anti-Corruption Court. So it's a very important move, and we're waiting when the Parliament will adopt the necessary law. After that, there will be some time to set up this institution. It takes time because pretty much it will be set up from scratch. So you need to bring new people, train them. It takes time.
How is your relationship with the IMF? It's always tricky for governments to manage when they're under a bailout situation. Do you have a good rapport with them? Because you are waiting for that latest tranche for quite a long period of time now.
Yes, we do have, I do as well as the Minister of Finance, who are responsible for cooperation with IMF, for coordinating the efforts of the whole government within the IMF program. We have pretty good relationship, mutual understanding and common goal to develop the country. Because IMF helped us in a tough time, and still providing us, this important support. Because obviously, after the country in 2014, lost a huge portion of our economic potential. We lost 20% of our industrial potential because of the Russian military aggression that happened pretty much during this couple of days. The program is due to finish in 2018. We are slightly behind. This is very kind of open. We are behind because the reforms that were in the program are very ambitious. I don't know many countries in the world, if actually any country in the world, that managed to do as much as we did over the last 3 years.
Gas subsidies is another issue that you've mentioned. It's a tricky one to deal with. How are you dealing with the public reaction to that?
Well, why it's tricky is because more than 50%, close to 60% of Ukrainians are on utility subsidies. Just imagine that almost 60% of Ukrainians receive subsidies. It's quite depressing in a way. But this is a reality, right? This is a reality. Gas is expensive. The country is extremely energy inefficient. And so our gas bills are quite high. So obviously this is a very tricky and sensitive issue, but we need to go through it. So the steps that we are taking is, A, we need to bring the prices to the import parity, which is within the IMF program. Then the next step, actually should be number one, is we need to fully liberalize the market to create a real market. Because when you have a competition, you don't talk about the tariffs. You talk about the market. And where is the competition, the prices are always at the market level, at the lowest possible level.
Cutting gas subsidies will send prices up. You're forecasting inflation of 9% next year. Is that a concern?
No, I think we're relatively confident about the 9% inflation. It is budgeted, and I think this is where we will be within this corridor.
You spoke about the damage to the economy from what's happening in eastern Ukraine. Yes. Are you confident that that's contained economically at the moment?
Yes. Yes. Actually, our economy turned out to be very dynamic, right? And after the war started, a lot of private business just were looking for the new markets. And Russia used to be number one export-import partner, the trade partner. Now they only have, their shares around 10%, while EU is 40%. We're benefiting from the deep and comprehensive agreement with EU, so pretty much free trade zone, right? And we exploring other markets as well, not just as a state, but individual companies do. And country is reorienting from the unstable Russian markets to more, predictable, more competitive, depoliticized markets. And so as a result, we return to the growth. We grow. The first growth we showed last year, and this year we will show a healthy of 2.5% of growth. Next year we expect to grow 3% and then 4%. Fingers crossed, things will look good in the future.
Okay, Oleksandr Danyliuk, Ukraine's finance minister, thank you very much for coming in to speak to us.
Thank you.
Now, trade ministers from more than 160 countries have been meeting in Buenos Aires under the umbrella of the World Trade Organization. The WTO has been working to reduce trade barriers for more than 20 years, but its future has never looked so uncertain. Once its biggest champion, the United States, has now become a major critic of the organization. One of the big issues for the Trump administration is how the WTO considers the likes of China and India to be developing countries.
We cannot sustain a situation in which new rules can only apply to a few and that others will be given a pass in the name of self-proclaimed development status. There is something wrong, in our view, when 5 of the 6 richest countries in the world presently claim developing country status at the WTO.
So what is the WTO's function, and why do some say it's no longer relevant? Kate Moody's been finding out. Kate.
Stephen, the WTO claims to provide a forum for negotiating agreements to reduce obstacles to international trade and ensure a level playing field. Concretely, that means reducing red tape, enforcing rules, and settling trade disputes among its 164 member states. Over 2 decades, it's been sent over 500 cases and issued some 350 rulings on trade spats. Its basic principles, including transparency and non-discrimination, can be used by countries that don't have trade deals. The UK, for example, has suggested it could fall back on WTO rules should it fail to reach a post-Brexit trade deal with the EU. Now, talks on a new set of rules have been stalled for about 16 years. The Doha Development Round focused on the needs of developing economies. They had argued that their farmers in particular were at a disadvantage compared to those in richer countries who receive support from their governments. The WTO is often accused of pitting rich and poor nations against each other. Other critics say that its rules override national sovereignty and can lower environmental and labor standards. Its structure, requiring full consensus, means a small group can easily veto progress. The US has accused it of paving the way for cheap imports of things like steel and aluminum, notably from China. Those complaints have been multiplied by Donald Trump, who believes the United States has not been treated fairly by the WTO. But analysts say that Washington has in fact won 70% of the cases it has brought to the organization. Now, of course, international trade deals do take place outside of the WTO framework. So-called plurilateral negotiations can involve smaller groups and narrower issues. 53 countries, for example, signed on to the Information Technology Agreement. Talks can also take place on a bilateral or multilateral level, producing NAFTA, the Trans-Pacific or Transatlantic partnerships, all, like the WTO itself, now facing challenges from the Trump White House. Stephen?
Kate, thank you very much for that. Now, it's that time of year when many of us make our annual trip to a toy shop. Here in France, like elsewhere, consumers are increasingly going online to buy the latest must-have items. It's a trend that's spelling the end for many of the country's traditional toy shops, which now account for less than 1 in 10 purchases in the sector. Shona Bhattacharya reports.
He's been selling toys for 34 years, but this Christmas, Daniel and his wife are closing up shop for good. Despite being well located in the small city of Brive, the business couldn't keep up with the supermarkets, then the specialist chain stores, and finally, the internet.
Chain stores use toys to draw customers in, and they sell at factory prices. If you're selling an item for €19 and they're selling the same thing for 12, you can't compete. You either have to drop your prices or stop selling the product.
Armed with lower prices and greater advertising budgets, toy store chains are ever more popular in France. Specialized stores are responsible for 42% of toy sales in France. 32% are sold in supermarkets, 17% via the internet, and less than 9% for independent toy stores. This shop in the southern city of Montpellier is one of the few to stand its ground. It's been in business for 45 years.
Chain stores don't always look after the details, and for us, it's the opposite. The details are the most important thing, because for a kid with a small toy in his or her pocket that he or she can take out whenever, wherever, in the schoolyard or not, a toy like that is a treasure.
Independent toy stores are increasingly rare, but they remain precious to fun-loving children everywhere.
Well, that's it from us for now. If you've any thoughts on the show or any last-minute present ideas, do get in touch on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me at NewStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Special event.
It's the latest key date in Catalonia's tussle with Madrid over the right to try and seek independence. On December 21st, this region holding new elections. We'll be bringing you full coverage with experts, with politicians and with our own reporters on the ground in Barcelona and Madrid. Do join us on France 24.
Watch events unfold live on France 24 and France24.com.